What up, family? We, three members of the executive board for the Hip Hop Theories, Praxis, and Pedagogy SIG for AERA, wanted to provide some information to help you submit a successful proposal, a proposal that will be accepted to the SIG for AERA 2020. I'm Sherelle MacArthur. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Georgia, and I am the program chair for our Hip Hop SIG.
My name is Darren Graves. I'm an associate professor of education at Simmons University in Boston, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the SIG.
Hi everyone, Lauren Kelly. I'm an assistant professor of urban social justice education at Rutgers University's Graduate School of Education in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and also co-chair of the SIG.
So while AERA has listed some new submissions this year, I'm gonna go over 3 of those. As the program chair, while I don't review submissions, I do see each one. So I'm gonna give an overview of the AERA specific elements of a proposal, particularly hoping to be helpful to practitioners and grad students. First, make sure that you have a title that's 15 words or less. And that's also a good rule of thumb for manuscripts that you'll wanna submit to journals. Second, you'll have a 120 word or less abstract that summarizes what the entire proposal is about. And then third, the full proposal, which should be 2,000 words or less. Be sure not to include your name or identifying information because proposals will be blind reviewed. So here's what to include within an individual proposal. First, after you have your title and your abstract, you'll need to have objectives and purposes. This is providing some background information on the problem as you see it, situated in the literature, right? And then the research questions that your study seeks to address or that this proposal is centered around would also go in this section. And then state the purpose. What is the purpose of your work? Second, perspectives or theoretical framework. So your theoretical framework is the lens that you're using to see and solve the problem that you're addressing. So what theories is this work drawing on? Critical race theory, Black feminisms, womanism, hip-hop based education. Not only do you state the theories, you provide some information on how these frames are supporting your work, again, situated within the literature. Third is going to be your methods, techniques, or modes of inquiry. These are the official titles of AERA, so that's why I'm going through them like this. So what was the setting? Remember, you want to keep specific places anonymous or as anonymous as possible, unless it is significant to the work, and use pseudonyms. So for example, if I were to conduct a study at my institution, I would refer to it as a large Southeastern university. However, my dissertation, I specifically named Atlanta, Georgia as a locale for my work because the culture of Atlanta was significant to the study and to the participants that I work with. Also within this section, you want to talk about how long you conducted this study. So this study was a 14-week case study, right? Who are the participants? There were 8 adolescent Black girls who participated, or 25 pre-service teachers. Also in this section, you would want to state what kind of study this is. Is this a qualitative case study? Is it an interview study, right? So that would go in the 3rd section. The 4th section is the data sources, evidence, objectives, or material. So what is the data that you will be pulling from? Is it interviews, focus groups, visual data, and how much of that? There were 3 focus groups with 6 participants in each and 15 one-on-one interviews. Or we analyzed the writing samples of 200 in-service teachers. Additionally, if you're submitting a theoretical piece, in this section, you would write the equivalent of that information in lieu of having data. 5th are your results and or substantiated conclusions or warrants for arguments or point of view. So these are the findings. What does your data reveal? What were the themes that were significant in addressing the research questions and speaking to the problem you pose in the objectives and purpose section? And then lastly, scientific or scholarly significance of the study or work. So what is the contribution of your scholarship to advance the field of hip hop theories, hip hop praxis, or hip-hop pedagogies? So that's the individual submission. If you're going to submit a panel or what's also called a symposium submission, first, again, the entire panel has to have one title that's 15 words or less. Second, the entire panel has one 120 word or less abstract that summarizes what the entire panel is about or centered around. Then it will ask for each presentation to have its own 15 word or less title. and an abstract that is 500 words or less. So that's for each presentation. So the entire symposium has a title and an abstract, and then each presentation has its own title and its own abstract. All right. This section will also ask you to have a chair and or a discussant. So really quickly, I want to tell you the difference between the two. A chair is someone who's expected to orient the audience to the session. So chairs need to be attentive to the time. If you have an hour and a half and there are 17 people on your panel, then they need to be able to say, hey, your 2 minutes starts now, your 2 minutes ends now, right? So that's what a chair does. They are involved in keeping the time. They may also facilitate the Q&A at the end of the session. A discussant serves as a commentator on the papers and the issues collectively. They may come from their point of view, right? And they are responsible for providing a professional and a constructive criticism and to raise issues for broader consideration that connect the papers on that panel to, in our case, hip hop theories, praxis, and pedagogy. Now, a third form of submissions that's new to all of us this year, but would be really dope for the SIG, is the demonstration and performance submission. This will still require a title and an abstract of what you intend to do, or title and abstracts for the performers, but it could be really dope, for example, to bring youth to perform in some fashion, like spoken word, centered around a particular topic. How are youth resisting in hip hop to police brutality or the environmental racism they see, or the list could go on and on. That could be really dope if done well. If your submission is accepted, you should be notified by mid-January. And so I truly hope that this was helpful information. So next is Darren, and he's going to explain hip hop specific elements for a good proposal. You're still muted.
Here I go. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I was saying that I wish I had a nicer background than Sherelle does, but I'm just doing it from my house, so it is what it is. So if I could add one thing to what Sherelle said in terms of putting the proposals together, there's a lot of different sections to it, and sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in each one. In a lot of ways, the results or substantiated conclusions is like the most important part, right? And so you want to make sure to give yourself enough space and time to give that part its due, because that's going to be the most interesting part of the proposal. Yes, those other parts need to be there because that's going to be the ways that folks are going to, analyze the rigor of it. But don't spend so much time doing all the other stuff and then not have enough space to really give the due that it's deserved in terms of your results. So that's all I'll say about that. So those are great tips for submitting a proposal to AERA broadly. But now you're submitting to the Hip Hop SIG in particular, right? And that's just something to think about in general, right? Is that in some ways, yes, the format for the proposal sort of across the board is going to be really standard. But what each, either SIG or division or a section of a division is going to be looking for is going to be pretty specific. And so what I'm here to just talk about is a little bit about what we're looking for in the hip hop SIG in terms of proposals. One really important piece, because this is, we're part of, AERA, which is really focused on education. So we're really interested in the work that you're submitting and its applicability in the teaching and learning space, right? And we're defining the teaching and learning space broadly. It doesn't have to be in the traditional schooling environment per se, right? But we do want to see how, if at all, what we're learning is applicable in a teaching and learning space, because we're really interested in the praxis. We're really interested in, the work of hip hop as connected to the realm of education writ large. So that's a real important piece, and really an essential piece, I think, that we're looking for in the hip hop SIG. We're also looking for innovations in hip hop based teaching and learning, right? And so I think, there's an AERA like every year, right? And so in some ways that makes it hard because every year we can't be putting on, papers that are telling us the same thing they told us last year, the year before, and the year before. So, doing this work, especially in the research realm, I think is always about finding, that gap and finding that place where no one has done anything yet. So I think we're going to put more weight on proposals that are going to show us innovations, new things that we could be understanding or doing in the space of hip hop ed. So that's going to be another important one for us. For us in particular, in the Hip Hop SIG, we want people to understand that hip hop has many elements, right? And then we want people to have a deep understanding of those various elements of hip hop, right? So we're not only talking about the emceeing, for example, right? We want people to show us that there are different elements, that they have a deep understanding of the different elements of hip hop. I'm not here to give you a tutorial on the elements of hip hop. I think, that's work that if you don't know it, you should be doing it on your own before you start to submit to us. But so the thing about hip hop more broadly, I think oftentimes it gets boiled down to rhyming, or even just emceeing, and there's more to it. And so we want people to engage in the various elements of it and engage in it deeply, not just a surface level showing us that it's one of the elements. If that makes sense. Again, we want to figure out how another important element is how does this work align with hip hop theory, praxis, and/or pedagogy, right? And so, this is AERA, so this is about research, right? And so there's the theory part of it, there's the praxis, there's the pedagogy part of it. We want to see how the work connects to those things, and so we understand that hip hop and hip hop ed is doesn't always have to be about forging the connections to theory, praxis, or pedagogy, but in this space, it definitely does. This space being AERA in particular, and then our SIG even more in particular. We're also really interested in pushing, breaking the mold of the norms of the academy, or in sort of traditional forms of research in our SIG. So yes, I've been harping a lot how we're in AERA and this is a research organization and it has its, conventions and its norms. There's some utility to that, right? And there's some things that we can't, change about that, especially if we're going to work within the bounds of AERA. But we're also trying to push the norms and the boundaries of AERA too. Because I think hip hop, as a culture, is about pushing boundaries, moving people's senses of what the norm is. And so, while the proposal itself has its sort of boundaries to it and formalities to it, we also want you to utilize the proposals as ways to help us push those boundaries as well. So feel free to take risks, right, in the proposals. The more that it's connected back to some theory and pedagogy, that'll help. But take some risks. And help us push the boundaries of what we consider, quote unquote, scholarly or academic work. It's really important, I think, to help, help us see the connections between the hip hop ed work that you're doing and other critical theories, right? That's again, we were talking about this a little bit before. Yes, we're pushing the boundaries, but help us see, right? Especially because we're talking about, really an academic conference where outside or in concert with hip hop ed, what other theories or disciplines, especially critical ones, by critical ones, we're talking about theories that overtly examine issues of power and privilege. You need to figure out how, if at all, your work is connected to and is situated within other critical theories. Again, being that we're in, education, we have interest both in how this work was a few different ways to think about it. You know, we can think about how this work is manifest in the sort of the K-12 realm, right? And also higher ed. And we have a lot of great scholars out there who do work in both. And so, you know, higher ed folks, you know, in the higher ed space, definitely. Folks who are in the K-12 space, definitely. Folks who are doing doing teacher ed, definitely we're looking for that as well. So we're looking at folks who are doing out of school work, after school programs, youth-based programs, community organizing. We're looking for lots of different spaces, as long as it has that education bent to it. We want people to think about their own identities, right, as they're, you know, doing this work, right? So it's important, as I was saying, you know, I think part of hip hop in general, and I think hip hop and in particular, is to really be critical about thinking about who we are in relation to the research, and in relation to the folks that we're working with. Hopefully not we're doing work on or researching on people, right? But researching with or doing work with folks and communities. But to be really upfront about who we are in relation to those, to the work in the community, whether that's by race, by class, by geography, by, you know, gender. There's a lot of different ways to think about it, but to be upfront and to be reflexive about that, right? And to not to spend a whole lot of time on it in your proposal, but to definitely, you know, think about it, you know, explicitly, and, you know, name it as is needed, you know, in your proposal. And I guess the last thing to talk about is really just addressing the, you know, and embracing the complexity and the intersectionality of the work, right? And so that sort of speaks to what I was saying before, is that we're all coming at this from many different backgrounds, perspectives, positionalities, and to embrace that, right? Not to think that there's a way to do this, or a way that hip hop ed looks, right? And that we have to understand that with our complex and intersecting identities, and by the way, the complex and intersecting, you know, disciplines and areas of research that comprise hip hop ed, that we need to both address it and embrace that complexity in this work as well. And I think that also that might be a way to speak to some innovation, pushing the boundaries, et cetera, finding that space in the research realm that hasn't really been touched on yet. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that. And I think that being said, I will pass it off to Lauren.
Thank you so much. So Darren sort of laid out the overarching goals, questions, ideas of the SIG as an organization, as in some ways a think tank, and also as outreach and activism. Specifically, as we're thinking about 2019, 2020, some questions and ideas that came up for us in terms of goals right now for research and innovation regarding the SIG, is we want to think about what it means for those of us who identify as non-youth, which I imagine is most of us in the SIG. So what does it mean for us to be doing work with youth, about youth, involving what we see as a youth culture, right, which is hip hop? What does that look like to not be a youth, right, and to say you know what hip hop is or how it resonates with young people? So we want to think about just our own identities, as Darren mentioned, and also how do we avoid sort of appropriation, co-optation when it comes to age, when it comes to race, right? When it comes to class even. What does it mean to be a middle-class identified person or middle-class living person doing work with underprivileged youth, right? Or doing work, again, you know, through the lens of hip hop, which isn't really about having, well, depending, may or may not be about having money, right? So what does that look like? How do you address that? How do you be honest with your youth? How do you be honest in your research, in your work, and in your writing about that, right? What are the moments that we tend to maybe avoid our own identities and our own privileges as we talk about the work to maybe appear more authentic? And what does it look like to really embrace and dig into those identities? How does hip hop ed work outside of classrooms, right? Typically we look at, you know, in K-12 settings, in P12 settings, in P through 20 settings, right, in college, less often do we look at community spaces, non-classroom spaces. It's more difficult, sometimes just IRB-wise, it's difficult. You may not have the same youth showing up every time to the program. Some programs can be short-lived, but it's also really important that we think about how hip hop ed lives in spaces that are not necessarily classrooms. We're also thinking about how Black womanhood and hip hop feminism plays a role in hip hop ed work. And I know oftentimes we talk about masculinity in hip hop and what does that mean and where's their power, where are their dangers there. And it's there, but sort of less so do we look at hip hop and feminism, right? And how is that a place to really work with young people across gender, right, across sexuality, about thinking about their own agency and their identities. And then, of course, another thing that is present in hip hop ed work, but is sort of less popularized, is looking at the global component. So what does hip hop ed look like in South America, in the Middle East, in Europe, in the Caribbean, right? In all these places, and also what does it look like to have digital spaces that cross all of those regions. And again, when you think about the outside of the classroom work, how is hip hop ed being taken up in those other spaces? What does it look like to be working with hip hop ed in Italy, right? Where there's a Black population, but not as a dominant population. And so I'm thinking about the global component as well. And the last thing that I want to share with you while we're all here together is, and especially this applies for any submission, but really when we're thinking about putting together a symposium, what does an outline look like? I know for those who are doing for the first time, it can be really daunting and sometimes maybe anxiety inducing to be pulling all of these papers together into one piece. So this is a sample outline of what this could look like for you. And especially if you're working with others, you might want to have a Google Doc or some sort of live document where you can put things together and see it in real time. Overall, if you're submitting a paper, as Sherelle mentioned, your title, up to 15 words, you want to know what kind of proposal is it. So is it a demonstration? Is it a paper? Is it a poster session? It will ask you in the system what the descriptors are, also your research methods. You just want to have that ready to go because I know sometimes you could feel like, cool, I have everything done. I have the draft. I'm just going to submit it and then go to work. And then submitting it is a whole 40-minute process. You just want to go into it having all the information ready. For the papers, note that you have a 2,000 word limit on your summary, whereas for a symposium, because there are more papers involved, that gets cut down to 500 words, right? So again, this is an example of what your outline can look like. Do whatever makes sense for you, but you want to have all those components ready to go when it's time to submit. In terms of the symposium, it's the same 15-word limit for the overall title. The descriptors, the method, and as Cheryl noted, you need a chair and a discussant. You want to have those people ready before you submit. You don't want to be submitting and then realize you never talked about that and then just scrambling at the last minute to figure out who those people are. So you want a 120-word abstract, just like for the paper, for the symposium. And then there's also a session summary. That's for the entire session. So you have 500 words, not inclusive of references, but those references should go in that section to share how do all these papers fit together. And it might be easier to think about how those papers individually connect to the goals and the theories of the SIG, but make sure there's also cohesion across them, right? How are they fitting into each other? How is this session one full session and not random papers about hip hop, right? So that's 500 words, and whoever, ideally you want to collaborate on that, but whoever is submitting it wants to make sure that they have that together in advance of submitting. And then the individual papers, you will need to have everyone's name. You'll need their email address that they use for AERA. Keeping in mind, some people have 500 email addresses, but there's going to be one that's in the AERA system. You need that one to link the submission to that person. You'll need their institution if you're inserting their information for the first time. And then each paper summary is up to 500 words. And then here it's an example of 3. Of course, you could have 4. As Cheryl mentioned, you could, I guess, have 17. But keep in mind that everyone has 25 seconds to speak. Just be really mindful also about how many people you invite. If you reach out to 15 people and they all say yes, you're going to have an interesting cipher session happening, right? So just be mindful of how many papers and think in advance about how many minutes each person will have to speak, because that will impact what they're including in their summary. I hope that is helpful. And I'll leave us there for now.
So we hope that this overview has been helpful. We have 5 days. If you've been on the website, there's a countdown. So we have 5 days until we submit proposals due July 10th. by 11:59 p.m. So we hope to see you next year at AERA San Francisco. Definitely attend the sessions, whether you are a part of the panel or presentation or not. And we would love to see you as members of the executive board at our business meeting. So make sure that when you get your program, you look, highlight, and attend the hip hop business meeting, where we'll have more of these conversations, but then also just how do we expand the SIG and how do we make contributions to the field with our scholarship. Thank you.
And if I could say one more thing real quick, that 11:59 is Pacific Standard Time. So folks on the East Coast, you might have a little extra time.
Got a little extra time.
Right. And definitely, the time is running short, but feel free to reach out to any of us if you have some questions, or at least reach out to me. I'm not gonna put anyone else out there. You can reach out to me for sure if you have any questions. And I think we'll just end it there. All right. Thanks, everybody.